I went to university in Montreal between 1945 and 1949. It was the immediate post-war period, and I think my generation, or at least some of us, were quite idealistic about the post-war world, about its possibilities, about its tasks. After I graduated in 1949, I went to the University of Chicago, and there one of my lecturers was Milton Friedman, who was just beginning at the time. And it was a shock, intellectually and every other way. The whole feeling of economics as a technical approach to the world's problems, the whole notion that life was contained within supply and demand curves, within tangents touching indifference curves, left me very uneasy.
Private ownership, the profit motive, and the competitive market are wholesome and good. They are compatible with God's laws and the teachings of the Bible.
Economics is a subject which is entirely self-enclosed, and once you begin it, you feel you can't get out, you feel trapped. The approach is inherently sensible and logical. It begins with the proposition that we live in a world of scarce goods. Not everybody can have as much as they want of everything. And so goods have to be partitioned, and the obvious way to do it is through supply and demand in the market economy. I knew that I had to meet this problem head-on as a theoretical problem. I couldn't just walk away from it. I spent my time in the library in Chicago reading everything I possibly could about this scarcity proposition and found there was no way I could get out. I was intellectually trapped. I fled Chicago. I knew that if this is all that economics had to offer, I would change professions. For various personal reasons, I went to Columbia the following year. And in the winter term of 1951, I took this course called General Economic History. It was given by a man called Karl Polanyi, of whom I knew nothing. The first day that I walked in, I was amazed that he addressed exactly this theoretical problem. Do we begin with the notion that the economy is a place of scarcity? What does scarcity mean here? What about rational action? There were problems which were not touched at all by this approach. Problems to do, in his view, with understanding previous economies, economies that had come before the modern period, before the market economy. In human experience, alternative arrangements existed, and consequently there were other societies. The tribal societies had survived prior to modern times for 8,000 to 10,000 years. Survived means they had an economic life. So the question arose, what was the process? What was the regular process that they could secure a livelihood for thousands of years without the apparatus that we have? Other processes operated which had nothing to do with buying and selling, like reciprocity, like the obligations of kinship and family life, of give and take, provided for people's livelihood. It was a complete answer to the theoretical entrapment that I felt, and opened up a set of possibilities of understanding tribal societies, feudal societies, and early historical episodes on their own terms, and not as variants or approximations to the modern market economy. It was only after the course was over that I went to see Polanyi with the possibility that I could do an MA thesis with him. I was interested in his work. I found that everything was helpful in terms of getting me out of my sense of an intellectual trap. He then suggested for the first time, after the course was over, that I should read The Great Transformation. I read it, and then it came as an intellectual earthquake. The ground shook from under me. I had not imagined the impact that such a book could make. Polanyi wrote what is, in my view, the most original analysis of the coming of laissez-faire, of the coming of the self-regulating market economy. And that was in lockstep with the coming of the Industrial Revolution. The Great Transformation makes such a big impact because it reintroduces into the discussion a crucial factor, or call it protagonist, that was left out in normal economic discussions and economic analysis. The originality of that book is to introduce society as an active player in the way things unrolled. The drama or the dynamic of the Great Transformation is to portray the coming of the market economy as an irresistible force of the Industrial Revolution meeting an immovable object, which was society.
This is a factory. This is the workman who tends the machine in the factory.
The self-regulating market economy re-envisions the economy as a robot which is not particularly controlled by any kind of mechanism, but runs on its own tracks. He called the self-regulating market economy a stark utopia and sometimes a negative utopia. Namely, that we didn't know where it would go, whom it would hit, and what would be its consequences. Often, we see and acknowledge it was the source of the new abundance, the new world of industry and factories turned out enormous new flows of goods as well. But at the same time, if it observed no particular compunctions in the way it used its labor and the way it could use land as a kind of dumping place, that could result in serious negative consequences that threaten community. What many people don't understand is the meaning of the term, the Great Transformation. It is often taken to be the coming of the Industrial Revolution and industrial society, but that is not what Polanyi intended. He really wanted to say, after the breakdown of the Depression, and writing as he did, publishing in 1944 as the war was coming to an end, he envisioned the Great Transformation as the way in which the post-war world would integrate the the economy and subjected to social norms and social responsibility. Hello. I kept in touch with Polanyi after I left Columbia until 1956, when I received a letter from Polanyi suggesting I should come on a visit. He was living in a small house outside of Toronto, at a little town called Rosebank near Pickering. It was a charming little house, almost a kind of a Hansel and Gretel house, on top of a high hill overlooking a ravine. They referred to the cottage as Skunk's Hollow, just as their own joke. I went to see him, and even at that age, in his late 60s and 70s, had immense energy. He talked at great length about his ideas, about his proposed projects, and suggested to me that I should join him as a co-author of the sequel to The Great Transformation, called The Great Transformation in America. After my first visit, I was invited back again. He talked fluently and almost endlessly about a whole series of topics. As a couple of hours went on, I realized these were very important ideas and that they shouldn't disappear. I grabbed a notepad and began to write furiously, trying to catch verbatim all the things he was saying. Between 1956 and 1959, I visited on 30 weekends, flying in from Montreal, where I worked, on a Friday evening, and spending Saturday and part of Sunday with him in the cottage, and going back to my job on Monday morning, and trying to transcribe as much as I could some of the ideas that he was putting forward, and produced these weekend notes. Part of our discussions concerning the sequel to The Great Transformation focused on the fact that the problem was shifting. It was no longer the institutional problem of the self-regulating market economy. It was industrial society itself. That they have within them, such industrial societies, the seeds of totalitarianism, a kind of a uniformity and an imposition of state control under the guise of not threatening the continuity of that society. Weekend number 3, July the 14th, 1956, there were 64 pages of typescript, and many of these are short insights, but they do have a common focus. For example, in his discussion of Max Weber's work of Zweckrational, meaning rationality guiding the institutional transformation in a machine society. If I open another one, again, this is July the 14th, 1956. The headings are Religion and Revelation, which is the terms he used for his philosophical position. A paper he wrote on Rousseau, called The Rousseau Problem. Discussions of Klages, one of the German philosophers. that he discussed in conjunction with, I'm trying to think of one or two of the other German philosophers, Spengler, yes. And then discussion of anthropology, comments on the international events of the Russians and the Chinese, a discussion of the early Marx. Polanyi was very keen